A very warm welcome to all of you on this politically rather chilly morning here in Istanbul. My name is Dawid Bartelt. I am the director of Heinrich-Böll Foundation's office in Turkey, based in Istanbul. And I welcome you to this early bird briefing on the elections in Turkey under the headline Results, Consequences and Perspectives. I would like to thank German Council on Foreign Relations for the cooperation for this early bird briefing. And of course also our experts, Sinem Adar from German Institute for International Security Affairs, and Christian Brakel, my colleague and predecessor in this office here. And we have little time, so I will just hand over the word to Stefan. Stefan, things still remain very unclear, but one thing is for sure, Erdoğan didn't lose, and this is something all political parties and all political observers will have to deal with. And if the opposition at best will make it into a second round. But with no further comment, I hand over to you. Thank you again for all of you who are joining us today, and there we go.
Thank you, Dawid, and maybe we bring you in later also to reflect a little bit on the atmosphere in Istanbul, since you are at the place. So also warm welcome from my side. I'm very happy that we do this cooperation with Heinrich-Böll Foundation Istanbul office as DGAP, as the German Council on Foreign Relations. I think it's really, these are really crucial elections, not only for Turkey, but also for Europe and in the entire region, I would even say. We should not forget these are not only presidential, but also parliamentary elections. So there are two elections have taken place in Turkey. I think this election, and I think this is what I heard from several people also, the mood in the society is will decide about the direction Turkey will go in the next years. And I think it is really a decisive moment for the country and also for its relations with Europe. I think we saw in the last year the construction of democracy, first of all of checks and balances, and we also understand how important Turkey is for other regions like the Middle East, the Black Sea region, the South Caucasus, also in the whole Ukraine context. So I think we really have also should have in mind the importance of the elections beyond the country itself. And I think the turnout with more than 90%, I saw the number of 93%, which in a country like Turkey, where the turnout is anyway very high, I think it's really impressive. So I think we can really see how important also the election is seen by the Turks, by the Turkish society themselves. So I think for me it's quite a surprise that Erdoğan won, according to the public sources, the election, but did not win really in a way that he's elected. So there will be a second round. I saw the last numbers with 49.4% and Kılıçdaroğlu with 45.3%. I think the whole discussion about the counting process, the announcement of results, I think that's something we should also discuss here, because it's quite disputed. And the second round is planned for the 28th of May. So I think it's relatively soon. And with this, I just want to introduce very quick the two speakers. We have Sinem Adar, who's associate at the Center for Applied Turkey Studies at the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik in Berlin. She was before Einstein Fellow at the Humboldt University, has a doctorate degree on sociology of Brown University and a Master's of Science in Development Studies at London School of Economics. I asked her to look a little bit more on the domestic angle, but I really would like to ask both also to reflect on the results and their takes from the results. But let me shortly introduce Christian Brakel, who is now head of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation in East Asia, and the former head of Istanbul office of Heinrich-Böll Foundation, and he's also associate fellow with the DGAP. He studied Middle East studies in Hamburg, and he worked for German Foreign Office, UN, and several non-governmental organizations. Also, warm welcome for Christian. Let's start with Sinem. I really want to know, what do you make out of these results? I think it's in a way surprising. In a way, it's maybe not surprising that Erdogan was still getting a lot of votes. How do you see also this discussion around announcement of results, also challenging also the results? I think and the reaction also by the opposition. So maybe we focus first in the first round on your interpretation also of this result.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for the invitation as well. Yeah, quite surprising to me, especially given the fact that almost any reliable pollster in the last couple of weeks, even though I think it was kind of in between whether the presidential election would go to a second round runoff or not. But it was, according to the pollsters, reliable pollsters, Kılıçdaroğlu was running ahead of Mr. Erdoğan. So in that sense, the fact that now Mr. Erdoğan seemed to have gotten, almost 49% of the votes is to me quite surprising, and perhaps invites us to think about it, also in terms of like the polling business in Turkey. But now about and excuse me, because this is going to be really distracted. I slept very little watching the basically the counting, etc. But about the electoral manipulation, clearly the ruling alliance used objection to the voting counting as a tactic to slow down the process. So that was clear, and it looks like the counting still continues. So even though according to the reported outcomes, almost 99% of the ballot boxes are open. According to the opposition, for instance, the head of the Istanbul CHP Istanbul, Canan Kaftancıoğlu, they are still kind of monitoring the counting process. So, but I think overall we can say that given that the difference between Mr. Erdoğan and Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu is more than 4%, it won't basically change the fact that there will be a second round in 2 weeks. And I'm afraid at this point, given that the parliamentary composition favors the ruling alliance, my prediction is that Mr. Erdoğan will likely to basically win in the second round. Basically, judging by the turnout rate in this round, which was around 89%, 56 million people will vote, and one needs to basically get 28 million votes to basically win the second round. And Mr. Erdoğan is close to that. At the moment, he got 26.5 million of the votes, so he just needs 1.5 million, and he can, I think, easily get that through the votes that were casted for Sinem, the third candidate, who basically, not that surprisingly, I think, got 5.3% of the vote. Long story short, I think for 3 reasons. One is that the ruling alliance got the majority in the parliament. It looks like they got 322 seats. Second is, as I said, the voters of Oğan, maybe not as a bloc, but will probably choose to vote for Mr. Erdoğan in the second round. And last but not least, I think because I can see that there is a significant frustration now with the opposition and how the opposition dealt with the electoral manipulation, with the counting yesterday. Although at the beginning it looked like they handled it very well, and it's a difficult situation to handle as well. They were calm. They were basically informing the electorate regularly. But after midnight, the situation seemed to have changed a little bit. And it looks like now there is some frustration. So this basically means that I think the momentum that the opposition seemed to have gained in the last couple of weeks might actually be gone in the coming 2 weeks. So overall, the situation, I'm afraid, doesn't look very bright. I hope I'm wrong, but it looks like it is highly likely that Mr. Erdoğan will get the second round. But of course, that doesn't mean that the opposition struggle will and should end. But before I basically stop, one quick note. I think this is also, and we talked about this, Stefan, at the very beginning as we were waiting. This seems to be really an Erdoğan phenomenon, because if you look at the vote shares of the AKP, I basically went through every city this morning, except in 3 cities, and they are Batman, Bayburt, and Şırnak. AKP's vote share significantly declined, basically in a range between 8 to 12%. So that is a significant decline. And the surprising thing is the MHP is the ultranationalist alliance partner. Its vote share increase, and that's also a surprising outcome, because no one was expecting that. So it looks like, yeah, so that's it's really an Erdoğan phenomenon, and why is that? Perhaps we can, and how is that happening? We can discuss that in the second round. Thank you.
And I just have a quick follow-up question. You said that there's a criticism how the opposition was handling the counting process. Can you a bit more explain how they should have reacted, or what would have been the expectation to react it, and why you think they lost the momentum in a way? So I just to clarify these 2 points.
The bottom line is that the expectation from the opposition was that they will have a very solid and reliable alternative system of counting and reporting of the votes. That is to say that, so how it works is that every ballot box, the votes are casted, then there's an electoral board at every ballot box. The votes started to be counted, and then at the end of the counting process, there is a signed form that's basically filled and signed in the company of the representatives of the political parties, including the opposition parties, and the head of the board. And basically the criticism is that the opposition lacked a thorough kind of not necessarily monitoring, but registering and communicating to the electorate their own monitoring of the voting. So that was happening at the beginning until midnight. After that, it started to kind of stop. And at a moment where basically, I think around it was 2 a.m. when they appeared in front of the cameras, basically Kılıçdaroğlu with the leaders of the other opposition parties, members of the Table of Six. And I think the expectation was for the opposition to actually announce their own counting. And it didn't happen. And they basically said that this is going into the second round. So that's kind of like I think expectations again within the electorate that's basically voted for the Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu and Table of Six. So that's kind of the bottom line. I made it very complex, I think, but I'm happy to come back to it if there are any questions about it.
No, I think that was already very helpful. Christian, can I just switch to you and get your interpretation? Also asking why the polls got it so wrong. I think why we are so surprised, and Erdoğan seems to play much better out than we expected.
This is a very interesting question. I mean, like polls or a lot of people who've been dealing with surveys in Turkey have been saying that there has always been a question of doubt around reliability among many pollsters. We know that many pollsters are politically beholden to one side or the other. Many of them do paid polls, which are then not disclosed to the public. However, I would think this time there was also something else at play, and that is that probably also in the current atmosphere, many people might not feel comfortable telling pollsters who they really plan to vote for. Earlier on, that's also a possibility that there was a last-minute change of mind. I think, but if you look at the election in total, I think we should not forget that the constitutional change that we had in 2017 was designed to do exactly this, it was not only designed to give the president the unprecedented powers that he holds, but it was also meant to establish the domination of the right-wing bloc, basically in perpetuity. As Sinem just mentioned, the AKP has shed a lot of votes, but most of these votes went to the MHP, but also in the presidential run, there is not such a big change in a sense that people or voters are confronted not with the choice of to say like, okay, do I want my choice to be a little bit less, more to the left or more to the right, but they're confronted with just two faces basically to vote for, even though we had like 4 candidates, but and these two faces stand for very, very different ideological camps, even if the opposition managed to bring so many parties together. I think also interesting is if you this is just a presidential race. If you look at the parliament, we have a very clear lead for the AKP MHP bloc, which is something that I think also was not predicted in this strength. Not only will this lead make it very, very difficult for the opposition to campaign. President Erdoğan has already said it yesterday in his speech, that if the president and the parliament would be ruled by different factions, this would basically leave the government at a standstill. And I think this might be an argument for many voters to flock to Erdoğan in the end. But it also, I think, shows that sorry, now I lost my train of thought. Anyway, I think this will be one of the major things in the second round. And the second thing, Sinem just mentioned it, that the 5% that this ultra right-wing candidate has taken. He said before the elections that he would be willing to withdraw in exchange for a ministerial office. But I think that was before the elections, and I would assume that whatever he expects in return, the price might just have gone up during the night. And I think it will be very hard. There will be like two things. He already mentioned that he's not comfortable with the support that the opposition enjoys from the Yeşil Gelecek, meaning the Green Leftist Party, which more or less acts as a shell for the left, Kurdish left HDP in the moment. Which will be very hard to shed for the opposition because they have much higher votes than this nationalist has. And the second thing that might factor heavily in the second round is for both parties trying to win over his voters to turn the screw on the refugee topic. This is a topic that did not feature that as heavily in the election campaign as we had thought previously, because both sides basically canceled themselves out with having more or less the same approach, negotiating with the Syrian regime and creating conditions where refugees eventually could more or less voluntarily return in the not so near future. I think this is a not very realistic approach. But we might see more rhetoric on this point sooner or later. And yeah, I agree with Sinem. I think it's much more likely that Erdoğan will prevail in the second round.
Just also a quick follow-up question. So your point, if I'm understanding you right, is that the change of the electoral system and also the personalization also of elections in the end played in the hands of Erdoğan, with the strong polarization, and personalization. So was it then not a mistake to take a relatively not very charismatic main candidate from the opposition side? And what role also the huge media presence for Erdoğan played here? So I think, as I'm understanding it right, I think the opposition had not the same coverage in media by far, So I think that in the end it maybe also played in the end for especially in this kind of system where everything is focused on one leader.
Yes, and it's, I mean, it's also a very identity-based system and a very identity-based rule. Yeah, it's very identity-based, and for many voters, I think it's just very hard to fathom to switch to one side or the other. Plus, in this very polarized system that the AKP has driven for the last 20 years, you could see, for example, when you saw street interviews, for example, that you had people interviewed were saying, yes, of course, we're going to vote for Erdogan, because if the opposition comes to power, for example, they will close mosques, they will close Quran courses, and nothing which has ever been said by the opposition, but like this fear-mongering, especially towards the religious or more conservative segments of society, is clearly something that took hold. You can debate a lot about if Kılıçdaroğlu was the best candidate, but I think also he was the only feasible candidate. I mean, İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul, has like a sentence hanging over his head, which might have barred him from running, like in the middle of the campaign. I think that would have been very, very likely. Plus, he has some other problems inside with other partners in the different opposition parties who don't like him. Also, they would have to relinquish control of Istanbul, which would have been difficult. Mansur Yavaş was a no-go for the Kurdish bloc. So in the end, yes, he was a compromise candidate. But we should also consider, given that the media is so much dominated by the government, and that especially in some rural areas, there are some candidates, not Kılıçdaroğlu, but like from the smaller parties, that some voters have never heard of due to this media control, that the opposition did extremely well. Yes, it's not the outcome that the opposition might have hoped for, but I think no one in 20 years has come so close to unseating Erdogan. But yeah, I think there are many parts in the system that are clearly stacked against them.
Thank you. Sinem, can I ask you about the Turks abroad? How they normally vote? What is the role of the Turks also in Germany? I think it's quite a big electorate. I think they normally would work for Erdogan, as I'm seeing it. But how this is playing into this election? How do you see their role?
Thank you, Stefan. I didn't go through the external vote in depth, but I checked Germany, thinking that you might ask the question in the morning. For one, the turnout rate increased around 3% in this election, from 45 to 48%. But it looks like in terms of the vote shares in the presidential elections, it's more or less Mr. Erdogan seemed to have gotten 65% of the vote, which was the case in 2018. And Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, I think, seems to have gotten around 31%. And that amounts to actually more or less the sum of the vote shares that the three candidates, İnce, Meral Akşener, and Selahattin Demirtaş, got in the 2018 presidential elections. So it looks like there's not really a lot of change in terms of the vote shares in presidential elections. And I think that was kind of expected. Like I'm a little bit, I would think that Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu might have gotten slightly more, but for Mr. Erdoğan not to get the majority of the votes in Germany, Belgium, Austria, Netherlands, that's almost impossible. Yeah, and there are reasons for that which we can discuss if you are interested. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit more details. Why Erdogan is so popular abroad?
I mean, I think there are kind of three reasons why people, I mean, first of all, before getting into the reasons, one should also emphasize that we are talking about around 65% of 50% of the eligible voters. So 50%, the other 50% of the eligible voters do not vote, and we don't know who they vote for. So the popularity of Erdoğan, I think, is also needs in abroad, in continental Europe, needs to be kind of thought of against that backdrop. But regarding the reasons why he is so popular, I think one can count 3 reasons. One is economic, which is more, and this was, I think, probably that might have changed now because of the economic situation in Turkey. But for long, the economic growth in Turkey was really a pull factor for, especially among older generations, who also spend a significant time of the year in Turkey. So the hospitals and the roads, etc., were kind of listed as wow factors, and for why people are kind of, Mr. Erdoğan is very popular among the electorate. And kind of the counterpart of that abroad is actually the services at the consulates, for instance. There is a lot of appreciation of the ways in which the consulates are now faster, services at the consulates are faster. It's more inclusive. And there, basically, the emphasis is on that. In the 1990s, for instance, if you are a woman with a headscarf, you go to the consulate, and it's very likely that you would be kind of, you wouldn't be treated very well. It changed. The narrative is that it changed under this government. So that's one reason. And among the younger generations, I think emotions are an important factor, in the sense that especially those who kind of feel that they are not included in the mainstream German society, for instance, and the charismatic personality of Erdoğan seems to compensate that feeling of exclusion from the mainstream society. That's why he's popular. And there is also, I'm not sure though whether this was effective in this election. That was definitely effective in the 2017 constitutional referendum and 2018 presidential election among the pious electorate, that if Mr. Erdoğan leaves, we would lose the gains that we basically had under his government. Again, and I'm not sure whether it was effective in this election, mainly because of the fact that Saadet Partisi, Felicity Party, I guess in English, ran together with the opposition as part of the table of 6. So that it was basically the Saadet Partisi voters who in 2017 constitutional referendum and 2018 parliamentary presidential elections voted for the AKP, even though there is a split basically between the two parties, voted for the AKP because of that fear of losing the cultural gains under the AKP government. So those are kind of like the reasons. But in this election, it looks like, for the first time in this election, the opposition parties were really paying attention to the voters abroad, even though, of course, paying attention mostly at the discursive level, I would say, and through social media videos, etc. One shouldn't also, I think, forget, as it is the case in Turkey, that the system favors the incumbents overwhelmingly. I think it's also the same abroad, because the consulates are at the service of the party. The party is quite infiltrated into the kind of the migrant associations, etc. So they have all the means to reach out to the voters, and that, of course, puts the opposition at a quite disadvantaged position.
Thank you. Christian, what role foreign policy topics played at this election? So how much domestic issues where we have a not very good economic situation, and how much foreign policy issues played a role in the election from your perspective?
I would say, compared to previous elections, you remember, for example, the very decisive vote in the 2017 constitutional referendum, when we had these big fights that were engineered with Germany, with the Netherlands. It was not the main topic. The main topic dominating everything was the economic situation. And we also have to concede that despite Adar's normally very fiery rhetoric, he has cooled down when it comes to, I would say, it has cooled down when it comes to many international partners. There is still, of course, the ongoing criticism against the US, especially when it comes to their support for the PKK in Syria. This is something that you can always exploit because it's something that doesn't sit well with the majority of Turkish voters. There is still this balancing with Russia against NATO, but you also have to concede that Turkey finds itself more and more in a relatively complicated situation when it comes to foreign affairs. I mean, the balancing with Russia is not only born out of an ideological belief, but it's also born out of a necessity. We have seen that Russia has given at least some material financial support to the government ahead of the elections by either lowering or not completely, how you can postponing payments for oil and gas supply to Turkey, of which Turkey is highly dependent, especially when it comes to natural gas. We have seen this support with the nuclear power plant in Akuyu, where the Russian government last year parked a hefty sum as a foreign direct investment, making sure to secure its aid from, or like make it secure from international sanctions, but also on the other hand helping Turkey to shore up its investment portfolio. So there have been some things on the foreign policy front that played into the equation, but overall, I would say foreign policy has not been a dominating topic in this regard. To the contrary, I would say, for example, this the rather belligerent tone vis-a-vis Greece that we have seen in the last 3 years has actually died down in recent months since the earthquake and since like Greek search and rescue teams were very present on the ground. And yeah, so I think that is more or less, I think, what happened.
Mm-hmm. No, I checked this morning also Russian media, and it was really the headline. It was the main topic, I think, compared to the German media, where the election in Bremen, federal state of Bremen, was much more important than the Turkish election. I was also a little bit shocked about this. In Russia, it's really a key topic if Erdoğan wins or does not win. How much do you see this blame of the opposition that there was Russian interference into the election in supporting Erdoğan? Do you see any proof for this, Christian? What is here the factor or the impact?
I mean, the tweet that Kılıçdaroğlu put out, I think, on Friday, blaming them directly for manufacturing this fake video that supposedly was one of the reasons why the third candidate, Muharrem İnce, dropped out of the race. I mean, this is something that is very, very hard to check. The Russians refuted it, but I think there is no, I don't know if Sinem knows anything more, but like, I think it's impossible for anyone independent to check. I think it's even very hard for the CHP to check if that's really true. But I think there is no secret. Stefan, you mentioned that also in Russian media reflects that probably, that there is a clear preference from the Russian side for one candidate. Erdoğan might not always be the easiest partner, but his strategy of balancing NATO against Russia, and this is something that I think at least is preferential to Putin. Then the opposition, which had said that they would still, of course, maintain good ties with Russia, they don't have another choice, but see the strategic compass clearly pointing west. So I think what you can see, and you could see that if you looked at, like, I don't know, the Turkish version of Sputnik, other Russian funded media, of course, there was a clear bias. And as I just mentioned, there was this material financial support, at least. We had Putin speaking at least of the opening, at least of this nuclear power plant, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. So there was a clear preference. If there was really like undue meddling, I think it's very, very hard to prove. Yeah.
Thank you. Before I bring in the auditorium also to ask questions, and you can also raise your hand, I really would like to bring in some more people. I just want to ask both again. So, what is the perspective? If you both agree that it's more likely that Erdoğan will win the election now with this constellation, Sinem, what does it mean? What from your perspective? I just want to have a little bit an outlook also with regard to Europe, but also for Turkey itself.
I mean, I can think of 3 points. One is that although it will probably be the case if the opposition win, but in a different way, we are basically talking about a Turkey which will remain quite unstable, and a ruling alliance which will remain quite fragile, and that has a couple of reasons. First and foremost, the economy, because we are talking about a country without any natural resources, and the existing resources dried out. So in a way, it's that would be a major challenge that would, I think, contribute to instability in the coming period. But at the same time, even though the power is extremely centralized under the presidential system, it is also equally fragmented. That means that there are like various competing cliques within the ruling alliance with different interests, sometimes clashing interests, etc. So against that backdrop, I would expect that actually that fragility or the incoherency of the ruling elite would also contribute to the instability. And of course, instability is not good when it comes to relations with Europe, be it with in general, the Western allies. Now, the second point that I see, and I still don't know what to do with that, is that on the one hand, actually what the results show us is that it's almost like nationalism is the winner of the election. Because when you look at the parliamentary composition, it's basically, it's a nationalist parliament, right? I mean, it's not news in Turkey. Nationalism has always been strong in Turkey. But at the same time, you also see now it's kind of like the most represented ideology in the parliament. And that, of course, has to do with, historical reasons, but it also has to do with the post-2016 dynamics in the country, which is shaped by a war economy, which is shaped by a very nationalistic, militaristic political discourse. But at the same time, even though nationalism is the winner, nationalism also seems to be quite fragmented, because now you have, for instance, MHP as the AKP's main partner in the alliance, which is basically an ultranationalist party coming from the Grey Wolves movement. You have Sinan Oğan and Zafer Partisi, the Victory Party, the newly founded Victory Party, that also comes out of the Grey Wolves movement. And then we also have İYİ Party, Good Party, Meral Akşener's party, that also comes from the Grey Wolves one. So you have kind of like this fragmentation within the nationalist camp, and there is clearly a quite strong frustration, which I think was overlooked by the opposition. Frustration on the one hand by the CHP, HDP, the Republican People's Party, the main opposition party, is kind of rapprochement with the Kurdish party on the one hand. And on the other hand, there is also quite a significant frustration, especially among the secularist nationalists, from the fact that the members of the former AKP members, i.e. the basically the splinter parties of the AKP, DEVA and Gelecek, ran from the CHP lists in the parliamentary elections. So there is a lot of and this creates, I think, also probably we are looking towards a Turkey that's where foreign policy will also be shaped by this kind of nationalist outlook. And last but not least, I think anti-Westernism will also be will be a very strong pillar in the, and again, even should the opposition win, I think it would be there. But the fact that the opposition was very clear in terms of its strategic orientation being in the West, I think there was kind of like a possibility to challenge that anti-Westernist backlash. But now that possibility appears to be gone. I'm afraid.
Thank you. Christian, same question to you.
As always, Sinem has already said everything that is relevant. But I agree. I mean, like, there's often a tendency in Europe, in Germany, in the discourse about Turkey and the AKP to focus very much on religious issue and political Islamism. But when the main driving force in the Turkish political discourse always has been, and unfortunately probably will be for a longer time, will be nationalism. As we said before, especially in this highly personalized system, it pays for almost all candidates, even for Kurdish candidates, then centering on Kurdish nationalism, to play this card. If you look at the ideology underpinning all of this, and this is something that hopefully I hope to discuss in an upcoming DGAP paper. There is also something where we probably have to concede that this is not only, like all the things that we also see in foreign policy, that this is not only born out of it plays well with the domestic audience or something, but there are deep-seated ideological beliefs, for example, that the president harbors. These are not necessarily that strong on, I don't know, for example, the Kurds and something, but they are very, I think they are very deep-seated when it comes to things like, for example, the West is on a losing track, the world order is changing, and which role Turkey should play in this newly shaped world order. And many of these beliefs, I think, are not that much different than we've seen in other authoritarian regimes, and are not that much different, I believe, although underpinned by a different political setting, than, for example, what we sometimes hear from President Putin. I think the question in front of us is, assuming that Erdoğan will also win the second round, is also what this means for the German government and for the EU. Because I think we can believe, as Sinem said, that the current course in foreign policy will continue. And as far as I know, in the German government, but also in the EU, there was always this wait and see approach to say, okay, let's not, I don't know, ruffle the waters until the elections, and then maybe we are confronted with a completely different setup anyway. However, now, as it seems, we will continue with Erdoğan. The question is if this wait and see approach is really the best choice. And the main issue that Sinem has already mentioned, and the main Achilles heel that the Turkish government has, also in wanting to establish itself at least as a regional middle power, is the very weak economic base and the very high economic dependence, especially on the EU. So far, Europe has always shied away from trying to use this economic influence as a leverage. But maybe this is something that needs to be discussed, I would think.
Thank you. So I would like to bring in the auditorium. There are several questions in the chat we already answered, but some of them not. You can raise your hand. Yeah, I would really prefer also to see some faces asking questions on this online chat. So please raise your hands. I can until people still try to decide. Yeah, there's Sergei is coming in. Okay, I also saw your reactions here for the German approach. So Sergei, please, and quick introduction and really focus also on questions.
Yeah, Sergei Dawid from the European Parliament. Thanks for doing this and organizing this. Very briefly, one option is that I would be curious is in how far is it realistic that Erdoğan would change in this new term? I know this is kind of wishful thinking, but I mean, he's not going to become a Democrat. But what realistically can we expect as to kind of building a bridge for us to change our policies, for example, in terms of visa liberalization, etc. Any reforms or something that looks like reforms. So that's it. Thank you.
You can also frame it a bit different. Maybe he has to also, in a way, in terms of economic situation of the country. Yeah. So and the importance of Europe. But let's collect some questions, and then I give it back to you. So please, you can write them down. Marike Petersen is the next.
And good morning. Let's just start my video. Yeah. My name is Marike Petersen. I'm currently studying at VU Amsterdam. I did my Erasmus in Ankara in 2021 at Politik University, which is very non-political in that sense, but still I could feel how my fellow students very declined towards Erdogan's politics. And right now, many of them are opting for leaving the country should Erdogan remain in power. And maybe that's a question specifically for you, Sinem. Do you think this afflux will take place of young people leaving Turkey because it's seen no economic future there? And what could be the consequences of such in that sense? Would it be even more difficult to acquire traveling ID? Would the would the government propose opportunities for Turkish, the Turkish young elite who went to university to remain in the country to bolster the economy? Thank you.
Thank you. Jens Bastian, already very active in the chat, please.
Yes, good morning together. I'm a colleague of Sinem in Berlin. My question is as such, it's a rather somber mood this morning. Many of you have talked about a surprise, even an unwelcome surprise. My question is, 2 weeks in politics is still a long time. What does Kılıçdaroğlu have to do to make the second round, the race there, as close as possible?
Thank you. DGAP. Cannot hear anything, I not see much.
Aha. Der from Deutsche Welle Turkish. Actually, Jens Bastian just asked my question as well. I just would like Sinem and Christian to elaborate on what actually did the opposition wrong, or what could they done differently? Is there also some self-criticism to be expected from the opposition? And Jens Bastian just perfectly asked my question, what should they do, or what could they do?
I take this question from Johannes Allefeld from the chat. Even if foreign policy has not played a major role in the campaign, which kind of influence that Erdogan's presence as a statement playing of Russia and NATO, EU in the context of the war in Ukraine on the outcome? So this kind of key player in Europe, did it play a role? I give it back to you, and we might even have a second round. I think there's still enough time. Maybe Christian, we start with you this time.
Sure. Maybe let me start with Johannes' question first. And I mean, Johannes, this is a very well-phrased question as always. You have been dealing with Turkey much longer than I have. And so, yeah, of course it plays a role. Erdogan's ability to project himself not only as a statesman, but like as a person of international standing that international partners have to take seriously. That he sits, like he speaks face to face with the US, with the European Union. I think it adds to a very psychological factor that is in play, not only for Turks in Germany, but also for many people here who often felt that the West was looking down at them. So of course it plays a role. I would just say, even though I would have to see polling data for that, but like as we just learned, polling is not always reliable. I would say my gut feeling is it has not been the major factor. The major factor, I would still say, is the economic situation in this time. What can Kılıçdaroğlu do to catch up? I think this will be very, very hard because we are not talking about 1 or 2%. We're talking about 5%. I think one, he has to, I spoke about that earlier, he will have to counter the perception that with the parliament in the hand of AKP and MHP, that the public would be left with a non-functioning government. This is already very hard. And B, to really get the 5% voters from Sinan Oğan, they would probably have to play hardcore on the Kurdish card, which is very hard to do with the Kurdish voters that they still have around 10%, and B, would play very hard on the Syrian refugee issue, which I think is probably in the moment the lower hanging fruit, but yeah, I think would mean a very, very dirty campaign.
Okay, enough questions left over for you, Sinem.
Thank you. I'll start with Jens and theirs, and hi to both questions. Well, if the numbers stay like this, 49.34 for Mr. Erdoğan, 45 for Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, and 5.22 for Sinan Oğan, even if Sinan Oğan's voters vote for Kılıçdaroğlu as a bloc, he barely makes it. And they are not going to vote for him as a bloc. I think they are more likely to vote for Mr. Erdoğan. And basically, let's assume that they vote for Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu as a bloc. Sinan Oğan already announced his condition for that to happen. We don't know whether basically he can mobilize his voters as a bloc. That's a separate question. But let's assume that he does. The condition for that is to basically put a distance with the HDP. That means that you would be losing the Kurdish vote. So then still, I think it makes it very difficult for Kılıçdaroğlu to get it, even if Sinan Oğan supporters, voters support Kılıçdaroğlu. Now, I mean, I would say that between now and 28th of May, it's really important for the opposition to kind of, because at the moment there is a significant level of demoralization, understandably so. So then they need to kind of, I think, revitalize the morale of the voters. And one question is, of course, whether the turnout is actually going to be still as high as in this election because of that demoralization. So I think the opposition really needs to appear and come forward, one voice, calm, yet at the same time determined. But again, I think the last 4 to 5 hours last night, something might have been broken in the perception of the opposition voters as well. So it will take, I think, a little bit long, and it might be difficult to kind of repair it in the coming 2 weeks. And again, the fact that the parliamentary majority went to the ruling alliance, that makes it very difficult for the opposition. Now, what might have done differently, I think they might have, I'm not sure whether announcing a candidate earlier than they did would be a good option, but they might have, I think, come forward with a little bit earlier with a plan that is kind of like easier to communicate to the population instead of, I mean, I think that document, which basically would act as a coalition agreement if should they come to power, is important. But at the same time, I wonder how much of the electorate really kind of read it, really understood it, really cares about it at the end of the day. So I think that was kind of like maybe a tactical mistake to kind of like prioritize that and in the public. I think it's important, but it could have been done in a little bit different way. And also in terms of, I think, maybe not necessarily showing their own differences that strongly in the public and their internal fights, because that was, I think, although it obviously played a significant role in terms of declaring the candidate when Mr. Meral Akşener left the table, but still, I think that kind of, in a way, kind of raises the question in the minds of the indecisive voters. Okay, could this opposition really govern together. And the government also really played with that narrative that they are not going to be able to govern together, etc., etc. So that's what I would and could say about the opposition. Ioannis' question about foreign policy. I mean, foreign policy is like basically the specific piles and issues didn't play a role. I agree with Christian, but foreigners did in the election, especially in the campaign of the ruling alliance. I think also in the campaign of the in the last week, the opposition as well. And I think even though the ruling alliance is fragile, I think they kind of managed to build the campaign, despite all that fragility, on the narrative that what we have done so far is a proof to what we will do. And it looks like it might have actually convinced people. And of course, also the narrative that Turkey is under invasion, right? If the current ruling alliance is gone, the opposition basically will kind of like push the country into territorial disintegration, etc., etc. Again, I don't have any kind of hard data on this, but as I was speaking with actually voters here in Berlin, for instance, opposition voters, like anecdotally, I heard from actually quite a lot of people that narrative that Turkey will be invaded, there is going to be a territorial disintegration because of the CHP, HDP rapprochement, etc., etc. Even the opposition voters, apparently in the last week, might kind of like thinking to vote for the ruling alliance. So it looks like it might have worked, actually, that narrative. How much would Erdoğan change? Sergei's question. I mean, he already tried to get, for instance, Mehmet Şimşek, right? The former economy minister. So, I mean, he might have maybe the intention, but as I said earlier, like these different interests that also compete with one another, I'm not sure like how easy it would be to kind of strike a complete change in policy. But definitely he would be needing money given the economic situation, and yeah, it's but at the same time he's not gonna. I mean, it's kind of like this paradoxical situation. On the one hand, you don't have resources, so you need to find those resources from somewhere. On the other hand, your entire empire is based on institutional deterioration and patronage, and that patronage comes with, you cannot basically continue that patronage without corruption. So in a way, it's kind of like, it seems to me that it's really a vicious cycle that it's very difficult to get out from, even if he has the intention. But one thing is that he seems to be very determined to change the 50+1 system, because obviously it completely disadvantages the AKP. Now, if that happens, that basically opens, I think, a bigger space for coalition politics, not alliance politics, but coalition politics, because you can't also, so maybe that will basically create an opening, but I am not very optimistic about the about changing course. And last but not least, Marike, young people leaving Turkey, probably, I think it has already been happening. And if the current course of things continue, and should Mr. Erdoğan win in the second round, I think we would probably see more people wanting to leave Turkey.
I would just read some questions from the chat because I don't have any other hand signals. Why did 50% of German electorate did not vote, and how could they be mobilized to vote for the opposition? I think that's here one question. Can I also add maybe two questions? I think also as someone interested looking on Russia, and I think there were also quite high expectations. If there is a change in Turkey, relations with Russia will also change. I wanted to ask how much Turkey is locked into the relations with Russia, how easy it is to change really the relations because of structural integration in a way. If you're looking into the energy sector, if you're looking also to the PowerPoint station, Akuyu, which is the first PowerPoint station, Rosatom is not only building but operating in the world completely. So I think it's really very much also integrated here with Russia, not thinking about tourism, not thinking about that Russia also bought Turkish bonds some time ago. So how much it is going beyond the personal relationship. So there is Diga is again asking a question. I would let you in.
Christian and Sinem, I would like to ask you, you've elaborated on the dilemma for the EU and the German government. Could you please elaborate on what could be done? I mean, what should be done in order to, I mean, okay, Turkey is strategically important. I understand all the facts, but is there anything the EU or the German government could do differently in order to have at least a little bit more democracy in Turkey? Or is it just whatever there is, they have to work with it?
Okay, I read out one more question here. You touched up on the point before, but can you elaborate a little bit more on the Kurdish question and the influence of the Kurdish voters? How did they vote? First question, and the second question, what can we say about Yeşil Sol party, which gained almost 9% in the parliamentary election? Can we count this as a success too? So, and I would also, I think just adding to the last question, does the European Union should not change its strategy towards Turkey? Also, I think having in mind, I think here's the question about the South Caucasus also, how it is becoming increasingly important in the entire neighborhood, also looking to Central Asia, South Caucasus, not only Middle East and Northern Africa, in the Black Sea region, I think, which is the key region also for negotiating the future of the European security order. Do we not also need to rethink our Turkey policy, having also give up in a way on impacting on Turkey? Because I still think there's a big part of the Turkish society who wants to have change. I think it's not a bad turnout for the opposition. Yeah, we are very pessimistic and negative here, but I think that's quite a success also in a way, having in mind what resources Erdoğan has, from which position he went into this election, and how big the group of opposition parties is also. I think to keep them all together, I think it's quite a challenge. So I think there is a electorate for change also in Turkey, and I don't see really the European Union or Germany focusing on this. So, and I have to bring in this question of Fiona's Kreuzl, who had not opportunity to ask. If the economic situation plays such a big role, why do you think so much voters favored Erdoğan? Is he not held responsible for the current economic situation? So maybe Sinem, you start now.
The last question, a wonderful question. I don't have an answer, to be honest. It's you are absolutely right. But one thing that I would say is that, I mean, obviously, the economic crisis and the economic situation is in the minds of a lot of people, that's for sure. But at the same time, and I have been saying this for a long time now, an economic crisis doesn't automatically lead to the decline of an authoritarian leader, right? We saw that back in 1998, for instance, Indonesia, Malaysia. In one of the cases, in the former, the economic crisis brought the decline of an authoritarian regime. In the latter, it actually strengthened it. Now, I think one should keep in mind that how much through social expenditures, social assistance, that President Erdoğan has been spending in the last couple of months to basically consolidate the support of his own base. And at the same time, it is not only about, I think, the mass support, it's also about elite support. Like what happens in the earthquake regions, for instance, like the amount of construction bids that were distributed to the cronies in the last 1.5 months since basically the earthquake. It's but again, in order to basically continue that system, patronage system, you need resources, and we've come to the end of the resources. So the question in the coming period is, should Erdoğan be in power, then how is he going to basically sustain that system? I'm afraid this doesn't answer the question about the economy, but I at least tried. Now, which one? Why would 50% of the voters not work? I mean, I totally agree with Sergey. I think it might actually be a good thing that they didn't vote. That might actually be a sign of that they actually do not care about Turkish elections, that because they live here, they are part of this society, etc. But another reason would also be, let's assume that they care about Turkish politics and Turkish elections, that might actually have to do with that, because in my opinion, AKP and Erdoğan was able to mobilize the percentage of voters that they could mobilize between 2014 and 2018. So the remaining 50% are voters that cannot be mobilized. Then the question becomes whether basically the opposition had better means to reach out to the voters, whether they would basically go to the ballot boxes and vote for the opposition. So I think that's also one, and I don't have an answer to that question. Now, I will combine the question about the EU, they asked question about EU or German government, what should be done towards kind of like strengthening democracy in Turkey, if I understood the question correctly, together with Stefan's question about the EU changing its strategy towards Turkey, particularly taking into account South Caucasus, Central Asia, etc., at this particular geopolitical moment. I think this is kind of like one of the perfect examples of this dilemma about reconciling interest with values, right? How do you have your interest on the one hand, obviously, I mean, you just need to look at the map to kind of like, I mean, I don't need to say more. And at the same time, it's a question of values. But I think at this point, and this is again going to sound very grim, but I actually think that in terms of whether EU can do anything to kind of trigger democratization in Turkey, I think that train is lost, unfortunately. And in the past, there were critical moments where basically autocratization process in Turkey unintentionally, unknowingly was enabled. So at this point, I think the best strategy is not to do harm. I would go with that, really the medical term, do not harm. I.e., I mean, I totally get that not basically working with Turkey is not an option because of various different reasons. But at the same time, it's really, I think, important, especially if Mr. Erdoğan wins in the second round, not to enable the authoritarianism and the authoritarian tendencies of the future Turkey's future ruling alliance and Turkey's future government, and combining it with what Stefan was saying about society. I totally agree. I think two things are very clear. I think the ruling alliance has never been this fragile, and the cry out within society for change has never been this strong. Therefore, I think it's really important because there is still even if small and shrinking, there's still a vibrant part of civil society that cares about democracy, that cares about values, that cares about European Union, etc., etc. So I think support to that part of society should continue. And that goes back to the point about do not harm, do not enable, even if not doing business with Turkey is not an option. And about the Kurdish voters, how did they vote? If you look at most of the Kurdish cities, with a couple of exceptions probably, there you see that there is actually quite of a big support to Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu. And even the CHPs, also the Republican People's Party's vote shares in the southeast and east increased significantly. But the Green Left, i.e. the HDP, seems to have actually lost vote itself. And that's, I think, the vote kind of like shifted to the CHP. Thank you.
Thank you. Christian, please.
Yes, thank you. Now, before Sergey is leaving or he has already lost, what can the EU do? I don't 100% in this, first for me, I think, agree with Sinem. I think it's it's not possible to really talk about democratization or real like rolling back the system with support from outside. But I think Erdoğan, for all his display of being the tough guy, has shown time and again that he's very susceptible to pressure. Anytime the US, Russia, even Germany really was willing to put pressure underlaid by of course economic, let's call it disincentives, he more or less gave in sooner or later, most of the time sooner. But of course there's a price to pay. There's a price to pay, of course, disrupting other issues or other lines where Turkey is important for us. There is maybe a price to pay, for example, for German companies operating in Turkey. And there is also a price to pay, for example, for civil society organizations such as, for example, the Böll Foundation. It's just a question if we're willing to do this. I think you can get minor gains with such pressure. For example, getting people released from prison or so. But so far, I think like our government, but also other governments always have made the calculation that it's not worth the price. The one exception to that, I think, or two exceptions we had. One was Dennis Yücel, and the second was more importantly Pastor Brunson, this American guy who was in prison here after the coup, and who Trump got released by saying that he will sanction Turkey on steel tariffs. He was not an important political figure. But like he was important for Trump's domestic audience, and I think the question is if anyone currently in prison is that important to the US or to the EU. How dependent is Turkey on Russia? Very, very dependent. But on the other hand, one has, well, I think that's something that we have to give to Erdoğan. Despite this dependency, he has relatively cleverly managed in recent years to turn this dependency at least into a mutual dependency. I mean, I think as this what we spoke about earlier, this election support has shown, that Putin, especially in the current situation, doesn't want to lose him. And there are still a lot of unknowns. For example, I mean, this whole S-400 system, we still don't know why Erdoğan opted for the purchase. Was it just to get out of Russian sanctions? Was it really because he believed the Americans or like somebody with American support would in the end be willing to fly air raids against his palace? Or is there something else behind the scenes that we don't know? But yes, there is a certain dependency, with one which is hard to shred, especially on the economic front, on the security front in Syria as well. And but it's shifting as well. I agree with Sinem on the Kurdish vote. I think it's not a big success for Yeşil-Sol-Gelecek. I mean, in the end, Yeşil-Sol-Gelecek has absorbed HDP. HDP, I think, in the last elections had something like 10 point something. Now it's at 8.7, I think. So they have lost votes, mostly, of course, to JP. But they've not gained anything. And it's also not, I mean, let's be realistic. It's not because people said, oh, wow, we want to vote for a Green Party. It's because HDP voters wanted to vote for HDP in a new form. Is President Erdoğan not held account to the economy? I think, you have for part of the population, the propaganda works very well. They just don't see him responsible. They believe that there are other powers, foreign powers, like market dynamics or so that he can't control. That is one thing. But I think the other thing is, like somebody said, Turks don't vote with their wallet. I'm not 100% sure if that's true. I think what Sinem said is more true, that the incumbent always benefits from all the things that he can give away. And I mean, there are many people dependent on social security payments. There are many people dependent on that on jobs that the government can provide. So it's actually like economically logical for a lot of people to vote for somebody who is in power and who can pose as, okay, I can distribute all these benefits to you.
Let me stop here, or just I think we had most of the questions. Or do you have anything important? Okay, thank you. I would like to thank both speakers. I think that was excellent assessment. We are now have 2 very interesting weeks until the second round. So let's see what happens and how it will go. Will end in the end this election. I would like to thank also Heinrich-Böll Foundation for this cooperation. And I would like Dawid also thank you, and I would like to thank my colleagues also from the DGAP who doing the technical support in the background. So thank you very much, and really looking forward for the second round of this very important election, also not only for Turkey but also for Europe. So have a nice day, and thank you for joining us for the discussion and all the great questions and comments. Bye bye.
Thank you.